What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Another Hobby Pants. Back at it in the studio this week. I did miss last week, and that I didn't love that. So glad to be back here this week, taking a break from all the other stuff that we do for these channels here, and doing just a little one-off paint job here tonight. Something that we can knock out the bulk of in a session, and I can kind of move it over towards the finished pile, because I've got a couple of very sizable projects I still have to work out. Some of them are too big for the stream, much like that Power Claw. Somewhere in the background, I don't know if you can see it, behind my head back there. Might be peeking out. Maybe Luke can go grab that and show you. Unfortunately, my camera just won't fit this ridiculous thing in there. But that's from my buddy Square Hammer. Square Hammer coming soon, hoping to finish it this week. It is pretty crazy. It is pretty crazy. Anyhow, I digress. We do have some news for you here, of course. This Sunday, we're going to be getting together, so no stream on the Hobby Goblins channel Sunday. We're going to be instead getting together for kind of a goal planning session for where we want to see the channel go. And that might shake things up a little bit with some of the scheduling of the content, some of the location of the content, and even the types of content that are going to be hitting the channel as we move forward. So definitely stay tuned for a formal announcement of how that thing goes. Let's be honest, I think most of us are looking forward to it. If nothing else, a reason for all of us to kind of hang out around a grill. Speaking of dudes hanging out around our grills, we are going to be painting the biggest dad bod in the business tonight. This is the Blob, the dad Blob, and it's going to be a lot of fun. You know, just again, nice little change of speed from all the other things that we have had on the table. So why don't we go ahead and get to that? Get rid of this guy's face right here. Blob number one, disappear. So let's talk about color schemes, talk about goals. For the Marvel Crisis Protocol, guys, I've just been painting them comic book accurate. I grew up on the X-Men, you know, especially the animated series. That's why X-Men 97 is so awesome. It really brings back all of that stuff from old. So we're going to be staying true to his color scheme here. Now, it kind of reads on this image like it's blue and yellow, but all of the research that I've seen, and you can kind of see it more so here, that blue is actually comic book black, right? You know, they shadowed blacks with blues, and so we're going to be able to do a lot more with that. It is going to be much darker with some blue tones to it, and of course some yellow stripes. Other than that, it is just a bunch of blobby flesh. Would you imagine that? I've got this guy ready to paint up here, it primed at the very least. We are going to go ahead and do some zenithal coats on him to get this kicked off and get him ready. We're going to be doing a combination of contrast paints and layer paints here this evening to get him finished off in a nice, quick way. You guys see him in chat. You saw him on the camera. Of course, Luke is in the studio. If you're here live with us, make sure you pop in and say hello. Shout out Luke. Don't know how long he'll be here, but, you know, catch him while he is. Luke, can I have you do me a favor and go grab for me, out of the fridge in the kitchen, a little can of fuel. It's a Red Bull can, and I need it. I thank you so much, sir. We're going to go ahead and get this priming started. Going with the bigger brush. Mini fridge in the office, yeah. I think Luke might have thought I was having him go buy me a Red Bull, but nope, I brought them in. So let's get started. We've already got our black on there. We're going to do a three-tone. So next up, being especially that we're doing flesh, we're going to reinforce some of those rich tones underneath with this German red brown. You've seen it in the past. You'll see it again here tonight. Don't need much. We don't need to focus much of our zenithal on the torso where the leotard is, or unitard, or, you know, one-piece bathing suit, whatever it is that he wears to fight in. You know, we don't need to worry about it there one way or the other, making sure it's in the right spot or avoiding any spots. None of that matters. We're going to be going right back over top of that to achieve the colors that we want after the fact. But we're going to do, you know, 75% coverage or so in the red. And then we'll go ahead and hit the top highlight with just a white. That'll give us our palette. Hey-oh. Well, as you see, let's try it again. There we go. Now we're back in business a bit. Always check the nozzles, guys. Always check the nozzles. I like to teach lessons like Inspector Gadget. You remember Inspector Gadget, right? He does the thing you're not supposed to do so you can see the ill effects. Here I am bringing it to you live. Just going to get this paint the consistency that we want it here. Adding just a touch of thinner. There we go. Let's slap him on one of these handles over here for as long as he decides to hold on to it. Because we know that can be a challenge. Sometimes sticky putty is just putty. And he is pretty weighty. I will say the model's MCP is super, super cool. But this guy had some really questionable, not mold lines, but these seams where the two panels come together, because obviously this fat boy is not one solid piece of plastic. That would be ridiculous. So he was basically broken down into quadrants, and you had to assemble them like that. But some of the places that they put those joins would have taken quite a bit of negotiation to get them to be fully cured, right? So we're going to see some seams on this here. You can kind of see one right there on his thigh potentially. How's that focus look? Let's just double check that real quick. Make sure we're getting a nice clean image. Perfect. I want to keep some of those darker tones underneath, of course. So we're never going to spray directly into his butt. We'll spray down his butt. That's not weird, right? But we're not going to ever hit from this direction with this sorts of paint. Keep those recesses nice and dark. I'm letting plenty of primer get onto the face because obviously we want to make sure that we've got the details in the face where we want them. And the areas that this is hitting, we're basically looking for full coverage. You know, you could take and do this paint scheme. You know, this followed by the white, then do like a pin wash with like something like a Gilliman flesh or something, and just be like, yeah, my army theme is like sepia tone photos. You know, there we go. 3 colors. They're all shades of the same color. Let's do a check. Maybe a little bit more on this hand here. Said the boots are going to be black, so that'll be good. And if we're thinking about blue as the tones of the suit, having the red underneath, if any of it is visible, is going to shift us into a really desaturated purple, which is good too. Be nice and dark, but it won't just be dark for the sake of being dark. It'll have a little bit of value to it. We have been getting opportunities in, a lot of the guys here in the cave have been getting opportunities into playing some MCP. And it's a pretty fun game, guys. It's a pretty fun game. Like any tabletop game, there's a bit of a learning curve, right? Step 1 is how does it work mechanically? And you have to really get that really well understood, and then you can start working into like how does it work strategically, you know, and start refining your tactics. So I like that it's got some depth to it, that it's not just to pick it up and move pieces around and roll some dice at it, and you know, there is a bit of depth to it that you have to kind of establish as you go to really harness your skill at it. But having it being such a smaller scope than 40K is pretty refreshing. I would never replace 40K. You know, 40K is definitely its own sort of beast in that sense. But it's definitely a good kind of moonlighter, right? Something to fill up some off time with. And I think the whole range of models for MCP is less models than I have painted orc boys. So that's also pretty cool. Yeah, don't like the seams and mold lines and stuff here. You know, I also just went with some very quick assembly on them. Did this during one of the Battle Report live streams. So my focus and attention was split. But we're not going path of the worthy. We're just going for something that looks good. Something that looks good and is fun that we can enjoy. I hope everybody had a nice Easter weekend, if you're into that sort of thing. You know, if nothing else, maybe you got to use it as an excuse to like do something fun or nothing at all, which can be also fun. I know I personally got in here. You know, the shop was closed, but we cracked open the back door, came in, played a little game of MCP, me and one of the owners. And another friend of mine as well, introducing him to the game. So that's a nice way to spend a holiday, if you ask me. I'm seeing quite a bit more wobble on this camera tonight, guys. It is an unfortunate thing that's happening. Not something I can do anything about right now. So I'm going to do my best to minimize it as much as possible. But just bear with me. Okay. I didn't put any thinner in there, and there was some sort of fluid in the cup, so I'm not going to risk what that might have been. Instead, we're just going to grab a new cup. Also looks like our camera could come back this way a touch. Yeah, I think that will be a little bit better for us. So I'll just do all the technical maintenance right here live on camera. That's the pro way to go about it. Not much here, a few drops. This is thinner than that German red brown, so do 2 little drops there and start with that. Grab our clean brush. Since it's white, we don't want to sully it. We'd like that white to remain neutral, not warm it up at all.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. You are good.
My brother's looking through his stuff as you start pulling.
Okay, and because it's a little bit thinner, I'm also going to put the governor on the needle here, or on the trigger rather. Kind of help keep me from going too deep with it. And we're going to go this angle primarily. Can be a little bit of texture from the spray, but it'll just add a little bit of visual interest underneath all the layers that we're going to put on it. And now here, you might see that I don't even touch some of the red, where his outfit is. The big thing here that I want is for the flesh. Gonna get some overspray. Overspray is fine. And what might have behooved me as well, swapping to the smaller needle brush. That would have allowed me a lot more control on the small mist. If you have the luxury of having, 2 airbrushes that are set up, one with a bigger needle, one with a smaller needle, that's a way that you can really leverage that. I do have that luxury, but I'm also lazy. So here we are. You know, I don't do the try hard painting. I do always try, though. That's something to be said, right? I might not always be trying to make it look as good as one possibly can, because I have the internet, and I know that as good as it possibly can look is years beyond my skill set. Every so often we can push ourselves, like we did with that Frost Gargant. But not every project has to have that depth. And I just want to pull this white up to its highest opacity on some of the highest points on the model. And I think what we might do is we might test that Leviathan blue, which is a very, very dark blue contrast. We may test that. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a little bit of the white on his suit, make sure that that's all the way around. You know, then we might get some of that color interaction between that red and the blue. I don't want to paint with black on the model. You guys that know me know I don't like to use black. I like to try and avoid it. I like to try and do something with color values instead where possible. Not to say that you should go throw away your blacks, right? Definitely a time and a place for everything. Well, I don't have any blacks because some random guy on the internet said he doesn't use black. So I assumed it's bad. No, black is fine. Black is just fine. Cool. There we go. You know, I've gotten quite a few painted so far of the Brotherhood. None of them have their bases painted. They're all like, the models are painted fine, but all the bases still kind of look like that. So I think that once I've got all 10 models painted for the initial roster, there's oh, that was more than I wanted, but that's okay. I think there's like 12 or 13 Brotherhood in total, and I do have all of them. You know, some of them on hand, some of them on hand soon. So I might even paint all of the Brotherhood before I worry about doing anything with their bases. And then I might use the base to differentiate affiliations, right? So you've got your X-Men, you've got your Brotherhood, and all of that. That's one of the cool things about the game. One of the things about the game that's not so cool is that, you know, organizing and storing everything is going to be kind of a unique challenge to overcome. And so what I might do is like paint bases for affiliations. Like do maybe, I don't know, like Magneto's purple rim for all of the Brotherhood, and then do something like yellow for all of the X-Men, for like Xavier's chair or something. And then those characters that are, you know, either or, they could be X-Men or they could be Brotherhood, I'll just paint their base rim with what I think like I attach them to. Gambit and Rogue, for example, can be X-Men or Brotherhood. Well, I'm going to paint them with that yellow rim because they are X-Men first. Brotherhood is like a smaller value to it. But then I can also look at the table and remember which cases things go in, right? That goes in the X-Men case, that goes in the Brotherhood case. Maybe just a touch more for his face here. I want to keep it real tight though. I want all those chins that they included on this model for free. I want all of them to be, you know, really, really evident. So I still want to keep some of that shadow. But that face is a focal point, so let's at least set up the canvas to make it so. All right, there's Blob. Let's let that primer dry down real quick. That's the other thing. All right, we can clear these primers out of the way. Go ahead and grab our wet palette out while he air dries the rest of the way. I was giving you that bud. He says, this is my good side. Palette might need a refresh as it tends to, so this gives us an opportunity to double up. What's going on, Angel Soto? How are you? Angel's the gentleman we talked about a few minutes ago. Got to check out his first game of Marvel Crisis Protocol Sunday night. As I said, great way to bring in Easter. You know, or 420 for some, depends on who you ask, I think. Looks like we have plenty of space left on this palette, too. That's good. Save paper. Just knock down some of these air bubbles. Or air bublés, if you're fancy. I'm sure that's a thing, right, Luke? I'm not making that up. People say that, don't they? I mean,
I've heard it at least a couple times. Maybe those couple of years, but hey, I've heard it.
Well, I can say for sure, after knowing me for 20 plus years, I know you've heard me say worse.
True.
You know, that is farthest from my worst joke. Right? Nowhere near my worst joke. All right, wet palette is nice and ready to go. Let's kick it off first with our flesh colors. So again, tonight's thing, we've done a lot of layer painting with the other stuff that we've painted for these guys. We're gonna do a lot of this with contrasts and then layer paints for highlights. So let's start there. Grab ourselves a decent brush. We don't need a fancy artist opus piece. Need something with good body and a reasonable tip. It feels like a bad joke in itself, doesn't it?
They write themselves.
Now, because he's a big boy, I want to have some variance, so I'm also going to throw a little bit of this Magos purple on here. And we're going to kind of swap around between the two of them, shifting some tones. And then once it's dry, we're going to pick certain spots to really, you know, come back with a bit more of the Magos and add an extra little bit of depth. But these two colors go really well together for creating depth in skin tones. If everything was all Gilliman, it would just be, you know, kind of one tone, all red, kind of that sepia tone thing we talked about, right? So this just lets us play around with it and give a little bit more value to it. So we're going to go on here pretty thick with it, but we don't want it to be too loose either. Add a little extra water in the brush for that first go. And I'm not going to be too concerned with being too clean around his suit. We're just gonna, this is going to be a layering process because of how thin it is. So we're going to do this a couple of times. You know, contrast, you could go full viscosity. And it gets pretty good coverage, you know, but you also get a fair amount of tea staining and things that like really make it obvious that you used contrast paint. So if you take it nice and slow and just tint it and shade it up a little bit by little bit as you go, you can have a bit more control of it. Is that fan going back there?
Just not towards you.
Uh-huh.
Next.
That fan is so quiet, dude. We could probably put 6 of them in this room, and you probably still wouldn't hear it on camera. Oh, and that makes such a huge difference, too, when you face it the right way. Wow, science is weird.
Getting a fan to blow towards you cools you off?
Crazy.
Never.
Prove it. Yep, it's going to look sloppy for a little bit, That's kind of by design. Hydrate the brush a little bit. This contrast medium can be so tacky. And we're just going to be adding this next layer's got a little bit more of that purple. And I'm going to let it pool in some places. This dude's even got like a stepdad haircut. Like if his Tinder account said he had a dad bod, he'd be catfishing, for sure. Yep, getting that purple. The purple is, I don't want, it's the easiest way to phrase it would be it's kind of in our shadowed areas, but it's not necessarily limited to just shadow areas. We've got certain places that we might want to, just have it not look the same as the part next to it, whether it's lighter or darker, doesn't really matter. You just want like all of this flesh tone to have varying values. So it's not just, all the same. All right, we hit that spot a little bit earlier than we should have. As it dries, it can create those little drying rings. And if you run a brush across it before it dries, it'll pull the paint up, but it won't pull like the edge of the paint up. And that's what we just saw happen there. All right, let's let that marinate for just a few moments, let that dry down, and see how that goes. In the meantime, I'm going to take a wet brush here because we're leaving some of the white to be the, the backdrop for the blue, to give that blue pigment a place to like really show its true color. I'm just going to pull off where I can any kind of like obvious like drips from this. So we're not looking to paint this flesh. We're just trying to make sure that any spot where we had like overage that makes it obvious, the technique we're using, we're just going to try and break that up a little bit. This right here is the best spot to show. You can see the little drops. And unfortunately, I didn't get to that quick enough, so that's just going to persist. So you'll likely be able to see, once we're done painting it, you'll likely be able to catch a hint of that underneath and understand what our goal was. Okay, now I have to actually physically place it down or I'm going to keep messing with it, and that will keep messing it up. Really messy. Yeah, that's drying it. That's not the new twerk feature in MCP. Don't. All right, while that is drying, we're going to go ahead and get a little bit more on the tray to do another pass here in a moment. And then we can actually start looking at and making considerations for our layer colors. under part of that chin was dry, so I got to drop a little extra in there. The top of this arm has still got some to it, so I just want to get this little spot where I can see it didn't hit, add to it, kind of the same way, top of this thigh right here, just add to it. But again, not moving the brush across it. That would create a horrible, horrible scab if I was to move that little puddle right there. Here, let me show you. Inspector Gadget. We did purple on the chin. We're going to do Gilliman's on the brow. Man, this guy makes me, makes me think about food. I'm not going to lie. This guy eats like 20,000 calories a day. No big deal. Now, can you imagine the grocery cost to maintain this physique? Jeez.
No, I don't want to. That's a house payment.
And that's a big house.
Yeah.
Luke, while you're hanging out, you can feel free to slap a mic on and hang out as well. I don't know if any of our banter back and forth, if they can even hear your side of it without it. But your option is yours.
Yeah, I'm probably about to take off here in a few minutes anyways.
Hear that, chat? He said you bore him.
I bore myself.
I hear that. And on this pass, the main thing I'm looking to do here is making sure that we are pooling in the recesses, like underneath these muscle groups. What we don't want is to have like the lightest part of the mini to be a recess at any point. That sucks. So just making sure that all of these areas have a little extra pigment to them. I got to stop hitting that spot, Luke. That spot is not taking paint because it's too wet.
But we gotta keep trying.
And any kind of little issues or errors with some of this, the pooling and stuff, like I said, we're going to fix it with layer paints. But even if some of it still shines through, I want you to look at this guy and tell me that you think he's got a great complexion. Right? I think the last thing he does is put cucumbers on his eyes for a spa day. You know what I mean? I think if he's at a spa day, it's all day at the buffet. Respect. we're going to let that go, keep drying. Let's go ahead and investigate what that blue looks like, because we're at a point right now where we could kind of go either way with the blue, and if we do something right now that we don't like, well, I mean, we just fix it here in a minute with layer paint. But this is a very dark blue. I'm going to make sure my brush is a little hydrated. That's really about it. And then let's just cover all of the blue. For our yellow stuff, we're going to come back with a white to pick out all of the yellow stuff, so we're not trying to build up yellow over top of a really dark color. You know, I'll protect some of the yellow where I can, but either way, we're going to put a fresh coat of white on it before we start building up any yellows in there. Anybody tuning in right now, if you look at this and you're like, that looks awful, well, you would be absolutely correct. That would not be a lie. We are full on ugly phase right now, folks. Now, what we are going to do is try and protect the flesh. I want to keep the blue off the flesh. Oh, good. See here? See how we just reactivated all of that? That's fantastic. That's so good. It's that same part of the leg that was giving me a problem a moment ago. And of course, it's the part I slapped with the blue paintbrush. Okay, letting loose of the handle. I mean, we are asking a lot of this handle. That's the other kind of problem with, you know, contrast is not great on smooth surfaces. Now, a lot of times, something like your body armor isn't going to be that smooth of a surface, right? All the ripples, all the things, but because he is so big and round, you do have quite a few smooth surfaces you're up against. So superheroes, you know, you have like Spider-Man, like a bunch of people love Spider-Man, a bunch of people love Wolverine, like so on and so forth, right? Then you have obscure heroes, like how many people out there do you think they're like, yeah, dude, I got into comic books because I loved the Blob. You know, and he's a villain, which is, he's more of like a part of a rogues gallery than like a full fleshed out character that matters, I think. Like he doesn't have as many like key story arcs as a lot of your other heroes. But if you are one of those people that's just like, yeah, the Blob, that's my dude, yeah, let me know. What's going on, White Chocolate? Great to see you. All right, we're gonna let that continue to ride for a moment, and then we'll fix the leg, but we have to let it dry. This blue is so dark, it did overwrite the vast majority of all of that zenithal beneath it. dark and very pigment rich. So we're basically going to be doing one more coat on that to just bring it up to full opacity. Then we'll add our highlights into it. But right now, just sitting here waiting on paint to dry. We should make a stream out of it, just watching paint dry. I just realized that's basically what this stream is sometimes. Next, we're going to do our horticulture series where we watch grass grow.
Oh, man.
I know, the type of content we're putting out right now, incredible. I am now regretting, Luke, that we didn't stop and grab a burger.
That may or may not be part of the reason why I might be leaving soon.
Yeah, I'm not mad at you. I mean, if we're setting this as our body type goal, we've got lots of burgers we need.
We've got to catch up.
I think I need more than you, though. I think I need less than you. Yeah,
Yeah,
there we go.
I got a lot more catching up.
There we go. Well, there's no pools right now that are big and thick, so I can go ahead and escalate this dry time just a touch. I think. Oh, help. This has got a child lock. Yeah, it's not going to go in. We're just going to fix it in a moment.
Yeah, you're recent.
Okay, it looks like we've got our flesh workable. That suit will take just a few extra minutes. But that'll do. I'll go with a little bit of smaller of a brush, still a junk brush. Right. I'm also, because that part just basically rubbed all of it off, we're going to go straight out of the pot on here. I don't want my wet palette to thin this down at all. What's cool though is that this, maybe on camera you can see it, maybe not, but because this came straight out of the pot and never touched any magos, you can see how much more yellow is actually apparent in this Gilliman flesh. Very, very warm. So that's the only spot I really needed to worry about like that. So I'm going to come back to the wet palette and work in this various mixture of that Magos and that Gilliman. Just to give one more fairly decent coat on the model. Clean up some of the splotchiness before we get in here with our layer paints. The goal of doing something like this would typically to be like get to a point where the layer paint can effectively just be highlights. We are gonna have to do more than just highlights. We're still gonna have to do like kind of a 1 or 2 color blend. I guess you can't do a 1 color blend, can you, Luke? But we're gonna have to do a little bit more with it than just hitting our highest points to really sell the volumetrics of this guy.
Magos is saying, yes, you can with me.
Well, Magos is just super agreeable. It'll tell you anything.
Yeah.
but it'll also lie. So never trust a Magos unfiltered.
They just want to turn you into a robot.
Well, it's cracking, Luke. Just getting ready to leave the office. I had to drop in and say hi, put it in a cowboy hat, and it's me. Just got my new camera and was trying out a few models in the studio. Oh, that was you. What's up, Luke? I went for the new iPhone. It does well for me. Very nice. From what I've been told, they're shooting a whole movie with the iPhone Pro Max, so that's what sold me.
They do say that every edition.
So yeah, what is it like an epistolary or like a found footage sort of flick, or is it like major motion picture cinematic experience sort of thing? That's what I'd be curious to find out. Either way is cool. Matter of fact, like I'm surprised there's not more kind of found footage stuff that's done on devices. Cloverfield, great example of that type of I guess that's a mix. Hydrate. Oh, it's just getting uglier. That's okay. It's supposed to.
Years later was shot with iPhone 15.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that next installment coming out. And that's the 28 years later, yeah. But that was a great franchise.
Oh yeah.
You watching? You probably not yet, right? Last of Us.
No.
Yeah. Luke, we need to get together at some point where like I'm at my house, like. You know, we were just there like 20 minutes ago, half hour ago, whatever, right? We should have done it while we were there. But instead, we suck at life.
That is not true. We just sucked at remembering that part of life.
That's the part of life. It's The Last of Us, man.
We got sidetracked on camera stuff. So,
yeah, it's true. Which is a whole nother life aspect, for sure. So at this point, though, you know, sometimes we kind of self-critique as we go. At this point, it likely would have been better just to start with a layer paint and then build up our layers and then add a little bit of a filter after the fact. You know, but sometimes you got to try something to know something. So we'll chalk that up to an educational experience and move on up the road. Let's go ahead and revisit some of this blue here. Yeah, all the Marvel characters I've done so far. No, I guess Mystique. Mystique had a lot of flesh tones, but even her flesh tones were all blue. So I wouldn't even like painting flesh tones, really. But all the other heroes we've painted so far, it's been like a little teeny tiny face. Hidden.
Like painting ultramarine?
Kinda, yeah. But sexier.
Sexy ultramarine.
Yeah, I think that she was actually like looking for Gilliman. She's like, I hear you're into weird shit.
Well, yeah, he might be able to handle her.
The Fox films. One of the things that bugged me about them. Oh, get out of there! Get out of there, Blob. One of the things that bugged me about them was all the extra texture they put into her skin. Just kind of made her look weird. Where in the comics, like she just is a normal person, but with blue skin. That's kind of what I wanted from it, and didn't get.
Really made her like the scales and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it was cool seeing her like shape change, shape shift and everything, where like the scales like kind of did the wave across her back or whatever. That was neat. All right, back to some dry time. Let's look at some color options for flesh. One of the things about the Two Thin Coats paint line is more flesh tones, right? We need more flesh tones that aren't just like various shades of like peach. And I'm not talking about like, you know, African American skin tones or anything like that. There's values there. But what I mean is like more pinkish peaches, or, you know what I mean? Like more in that direction. A lot of them are like just moving directly towards brown. We're going to grab these two. This is what we're going to do a lot of our basing with, and then we're going to be painting in our muscle groups, and we're going to be leaving behind a fair amount of the shadows underneath. So with this, we'll also be switching to a slightly nicer brush. Now that we're not worried about, you know, we're not using a contrast paint, how gunky it gets. It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you. So since we're missing some pinks, what we're going to do here is I'm going to take a little bit of this Magos. And I'm going to get a little bit of that Magos inside of some of that flesh. And so that's like the type of color that I'm saying that I would like to see more of. All right, then like we did with the Frost Gargant, we're just going to like start painting in some lines. Make sure our paint is well hydrated, it's got good flow. Contrast is going to show us where little recesses might exist. And as long as we're kind of doing this cross-hatching technique, then it will play as texture and we won't need necessarily the full coverage. So that's what we're going to shoot for here. And with any luck, it'll work. And I think we only need it to work a little bit. Rogue hair on the brush tip. And then each layer that we move through will just get a little bit less. A little bit smaller lines, distanced further apart. Oh, somebody get in here, stat. I've got a rogue mustache hair that is trying to kill me. Luke, come back. Fix my mustache. So we're just sketching this color in though. Pretty easy stuff. Now, had I gone the other way and started with a layer paint and then built up from there, what I would have probably done would be glistening gums, is what the GW or what the Tooth and Coats range calls it. Trying to remember what GW's version of it is. But it evades me. Screamer Pink is the name of it. I just want to make sure that my paint is staying thin enough too. As we move into the paint here, it's going to be thickening up a little bit as we go. So we just want to maintain our consistency as we go. Started watching Rings of Power. I thought I'd seen the first season and wasn't impressed with it because it just didn't seem memorable. And then I realized I never saw the first season, which is why it wasn't memorable. Pretty interesting. I'll tell you, everybody online saying season 2 is very good. Like season 2 is where it really picks up, is the main thing that I was motivated to go give it a try. White chocolate, you haven't seen any Stranger Things? Like none of it? Because I don't believe the newest season is out yet, if that's what you mean. There is a Stranger Things show on Netflix right now that is kind of, there's a live show of Stranger Things that some production company is putting on out there. And the current thing on Netflix that just popped up recently is, looks like kind of a documentary about like a behind the scenes look at that live show. I actually saw it the other day and I was like, oh, new season, yeah. So I was a little disappointed when I found out it was not. Got a little bit of our flesh tone on his belly there. Easy fix. Easy fix. So doing layer paints, what I should have done is hit his underside. Remember I said I wasn't going to spray into his butt? Well, I should have sprayed into his butt. Should have gotten just a little bit down in there to give me a little bit more color variance now that I know that we're doing all this layer paint. Not a big deal. We're going to feel our way through this model till it's finished, and I'm sure we'll have something that we'll be happy enough with. Coming back, getting other paths too, just to clear up obvious brush strokes as we're going. You know, some jagged edges where it might not supposed to be jagged. If it conveys as texture, great. If it conveys as a jagged brush stroke, we fix it. Now, we have basically worked just about all of the magos out of the paint that's on my brush now. So now we're getting some of the true tone that doesn't have that magos in it. So the colors are shifting a little bit too, so we're just going to be going a little bit smaller and more so into the raised surfaces. You know, because our next step is going to be doing that again, but with an even lighter color. And that's what we're going to use to try and achieve our volumetrics. quick way to do this though. Layer painting wasn't meant to be quick. All right, so we've got this other arm to do, and I'm out of Magos on the palette. Let's go ahead and refresh that. All right, after mixing like that, you get a lot of paint up in your ferrule. So let's just go ahead and clean the brush. The other thing is kind of happening here because of the way we did this. We're kind of getting what Vince Venturella would call muscle islands, right? Where you can kind of, because of the way the shadow is laid in there, you know, it's too stark. Like you can really see it on his leg there, where it's like just goes from that darkest color right into that lighter color like that. So we're gonna have to do something about that. You know, that might be a filter with an airbrush once we've got our skin where we want it. That might be some additional glazing, taking more of that Magos into some of those recesses to kind of blend the transition. But we know that it's on the list of things that need to happen. Otherwise, it'll only look so good. And we're not trying to go for showcase, but we still want it to be something that we like to look at. So we're just going to keep building our muscle islands in the meantime. I'm an island boy. Yeah, Vince Venturella called me an island boy. Oh man, that's a guy I'd like to meet one of these days. I definitely find his videos very informative. And he's got quite a snarky personality, so I think we'd get along fine. Okay, it's coming back across. Fill in some of these holidays with that slightly brighter flesh tone here. And we're going to be bringing it up brighter than we want the finished product to be if we're going to use the airbrush to filter it. Airbrush will then desaturate a fair bit of it and bring down a lot of the vibrancy, which might be exactly what we need. Oop. All right. All right. This is just a folly of errors tonight, folks. Part of the process. Part of the journey. Can't win them all, right? Sometimes it's going to be easy. Sometimes you're going to have to fix everything you do. And, well, tonight is one of those latter nights. What's going on, Adam Peterson? How are you? Lots of little things not going as we expected tonight, Adam. You know that process all too well, I'm sure. Just keep painting. Just keep painting. If your paint is thin enough, you can make a lot of mistakes and get away with it. Because that gives you extra layers to fix. Okay, that needs to thin just a little bit more. Paint through the ugly indeed. You got it, man. You got it. And remember, we set our stakes, right? This is low stakes painting. Personal collection, not for showcase. This is painting for the sake of painting instead of painting because it needs to be done. All right, I'm going to get this hand done. We're going to stand up. We're going to stretch it out. And we're going to come back. We're going to add our next pass on the flesh. Getting closer. Big thing is making sure that in the middle of these muscle groups is at full opacity before we start trying to blend. All right, just a few more spots to deal with. All right, we're gonna let that set for a minute. We've already got the paint next to it that we're gonna be working with. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our brush going here. We're going to take and just find kind of a middle ground between these two colors. Make sure you've got a good consistency for it. And we'll start getting our highlights on here. A little more paint on the brush than I should have. We're leaving little spots at the end of the pull. So I'll just dab a little bit off on the paper towel. When I tell you I've got a mustache hair driving me crazy, oh my God. Absolutely crazy. Just kind of begin sketchy here. You know, not like laying paint too smooth. Try and use that to our advantage. There's just so much flesh on this guy that it becomes like one of the primary focal points of the model. And if we want to accomplish muscle fibers, we want to make sure the sketching is all moving in effectively the same direction. So think about the way the muscle fibers in the arm would go. Kind of replicate that a little bit. On the second pass, I'm not going all the way to the top either, you'll see. Just kind of doing the middle of the muscle group. I just need to shave my whole upper lip. loosen the paint just a touch. Yeah, definitely like a Screamer Pink or a Glistening Gums. Would have been a better undercoat than trying to do something interesting with the contrast, for sure. Yeah, the reason I picked this guy tonight, you know, like we talk about the game, he synergizes pretty well apparently with Toad. Toad came in the affiliation pack, which those were the first models I painted. You know, it's 4 models in a package. It had Magneto, Mystique, Sabretooth, and Toad. And I mean, Toad was one of those like kind of like just background characters, of course, but the other ones were kind of key characters. You know, Magneto, Mystique, Sabretooth, a lot of depth to the characters. And so I knew I wanted to be able to play with them on the table. So now that I've got those painted and he synergizes well with Toad, you know, it's like, oh, well, let's go ahead and paint him up then. Again, no real affinity for this character. I've never cared about him one way or the other, really. You know, he's not a impactful enough character to like really like or hate, you know, in that sense. So, but the goal is to paint up the entire range of Brotherhood. So, Bob, you got to get done. Like it or not. Still on the desk, fully assembled, ready for paint. This still need to happen. I've got Pyro and Emma Frost. Just keep going around the model until we're pretty happy with where we've got that highlight built up. A lot of the deepest stuff up underneath I'm not even going to mess with. It's going to be dark and ugly. But you're going to have to pick him up and aim his butt at your face to see it. So I feel pretty confident that that'll be a non-issue. I'm sure the last thing people are going to see when they see this model is like, ooh, let me see that butt. Except for maybe Rob. What's up, Rob? Shout out. You know what style I do with the dry brush on my Marines? I found out you can do the same thing with tiny makeup sponges. Oh, yeah. You know, a lot of people, like, that's actually a big trend that's picking up, is like the egg-shaped sponges. You know, it's a pretty cool way to go about doing it. I've had some success with it. The thing I'm the weakest at is brush painting and layer painting, so I always try to make sure that there's some of that in these projects that I'm doing. And like we talked about, tonight is a night that I should have done more of it even. You know, it would have actually improved the outcome, I think, had I done more of it from the very start. But better late than never. We're getting there. Doesn't look terrible. Doesn't look terrible. So now we're just going to come into this lightest color here. Same general thing, but even more selective with where it goes. And you see we're like just doing like kind of a four-step process, right? The darkest flesh tone. Give me a second, I'll look at the bottle and tell you what it is. We did that with a little bit of Magos to give us some pink to it. Then we used the normal color without any Magos. Then we diluted the normal color by half with this paint we're working on now. And now it's just this paint, just raw, right out of the box. Right out of the, well, it'd be paint in a box, that's weird. Right out of the tube or bottle. Whatever this vessel is called, people. If you wanted to do like a nice version of this, what you'd be doing is you'd be glazing these transitionary steps kind of back and forth over top of each other at each transition. And that would give like nice, smooth gradients across. Like I said, we're trying to leverage some of this texture from the sketchy way in which we're applying the paint. So we're not too worried about creamy blends. almost a bit of stippling going on in certain places as well. And this is thin enough that we'll be able to come back and do it even smaller and get it to full opacity in certain spots for the highest highlights. Tops of knees, most upward facing parts of the muscle groups. It's funny, is a lot of times like flesh is one of my favorite things to paint too, like different flesh types. The blending can be a lot of fun, but there's also times it can be very, very frustrating. Yeah, you're quite good at the brushwork too, Adam. I can tell. I can definitely see in the quality of the work you put out that you've got a fair bit of practice, which typically means a fair amount of passion, right? The more passionate we are, the more willing we are going to be able to do the thing that might not necessarily be the most fun in the early stages. Other people might just find it fun right out the rip, and so that's why they do it, and that's why they get good at it. Back of that leg is ugly. Get a little highlights into this face of his. Arms reach is not bad. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is maybe reinforce some of the shadows. So we're going to go in the direction of that glistening gums like we spoke about. Let me find her. This is what we put in that, basically the layer paint version of that Magos. Magos might have a little bit more browning effect to it. So we're going to get this nice and thin. Let's see if we come right over top of some of those creases where the contrast is showing through. Let's build up some pinks over top of that. That'll help us round out some muscles. It'll also help us diffuse down these muscle islands just a little bit. Add a little bit more interest to the colors as well, so it's not like so monochromatic. You know, I think this guy's like so big and stuff, kind of makes me think of like a prize pig, right? And that's kind of the illusion that I'm trying to create, getting some of this pink in here too. Like I want you to see it too. You know what I mean? So. Get it on that brown that's in the recesses. You know, glaze some of it into the undersides of these muscle groups. Where that flesh meets the pants. Again, we're using super loose paint for this. We want it to take like 8 coats to like really stick. We just want it tinting here. And this is less about shadows and more about blood flow. Like we're probably going to use the airbrush like we talked about with a filter here in just a few moments to give a little bit more interest to it as well. And that'll be our reinforcing shadow step. I think that helps it a little bit at arm's reach too. Do think it's helping some of our volumetrics as well, helping some of our round stuff look more round. Which is a big old fat guy. It's all round stuff. It's important. Yeah, it's okay. I'm starting to like it a little bit better. Different than how I envisioned to start with, because we had to make these decisions on the fly. Ever paint Kingdom Death models? They have a ton of flesh potential for painting. I haven't, for many years now. All of my painting has been restricted to 40K, which is, again, what makes this little moonlighting with MCP so nice, is the fact that I got to do something different. And I can just spend as much time as I want to on a single model, with no concern at all about the implication it's going to have for all the other models I have to paint. Right, in 40K, if I paint something, I've got to make sure everything matches by the end of it. And so if I do something on power armor and I have to pivot and I have to figure out a fix for it, well, I have to do it the same way, effectively, every time I paint after that for that army intro. And this, I can have every model have slightly different styles. You know, as I get better at certain things are going to look better on the models. And, well, that's cool, right? Because now we can, like, kind of show growth. But at the same time, it won't stand out from everything else because it's done a little bit differently. I have painted so many orcs in the paint style that I ended up with my first batch of orcs on. And although it was able to elevate a little bit over time through the years, in order to look cohesive, I had to make sure it didn't change so much that it no longer looked like those first orcs I painted. And this pink is kind of serving the purpose of a bridge between those colors as well. You know, between the three different flesh tones and where those blends would overlap. So looking a lot less like Muscle Islands now. I'm just getting more interest to it. Yeah, not bad. Not bad at all. Getting closer to getting out of the ugly phase. But we're not there yet. Hey, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think the pink is kind of the secret savior right here. It's kind of the thing that's allowing it to come all back together instead of us trying to force it in. It's just kind of opening the door for it. Also giving a different tone to a lot of the other stuff that we've got painted up for the army at the moment. Oh, let me show you what I mean. Well, let me show you what I mean shortly, because I don't see it at the moment. Wow. Let's look at him alongside his friends, huh? So, his homie, tongue broke off in a game earlier today. Got to fix that. That pink is also going to give him some cohesion right here alongside. Now, he's become very pale where he's not pink. So let's go ahead and jump into, they've got a nice Eastery palette. let's go ahead and jump into that airbrush filter. We're going to come back to Gilliman flesh. Right, now that we've got everything right where we want it to be, Gilliman flesh will be next. We are going to take our smaller airbrush. Let's see how it's spraying today. It feels pretty good with just air. Let's see with some water. Looks like it's moving pretty nice with water. So we won't need much. We're just going to take this brush we were putting that pink on with. That way a little bit of pink in there is not going to hurt it. Get just a couple little drops in here. And we're going to basically hit all of the undersides where these pinks are. Again, seeking to kind of marry those colors and give them some separation from the top facing stuff to the stuff underneath. Super thin down here, so just very, very faintly tinting it. And again, this is the reinforcing our shadow stage. Smooths it out even further. So what we did is we took and traded in the extra layers of glazing, right? Let it be kind of thick and like obvious up front. Not thick, but let it be a little bit chunky up front where our blends aren't completely smooth. But then you allow the filter to do its work. And I think we get a pretty interesting outcome, actually. I'm not quite ready to say I'm happy with it, guys. Not quite, but gosh, we're getting closer. We zoomed all the way in. Here we go. Let's zoom all the way in. Let's tighten up that focus. Back here a little bit uglier, right? That's okay. Look me in my eyes. Missed a whole chunk of the leg there, but far along as we are. That knocks the paleness off as a trait and makes it, you know, more of where the highlight hits. So it's not bad. It's not bad. Again, next time we layer from the very beginning. Layer from the very beginning, then get our filter out. Because the main thing is the deepest shadows right there are just too deep. Simply put, They're just too strong. Where in all the creases of those muscle lines. But yeah, decent color there. Not too shabby at all. And then of course, if I decided that even the highlights were too high, you know, taking and adding in, just putting a very light coat across the model of, you know, that whether it be Gilliman flesh or whatever. Matter of fact, I want to drop a little bit of Magos on here too. Oh yeah, takes a lot longer with a glaze for sure. And with the glaze, you still have to be very cautious to like not allow the edge of the paint to be visible, if you know what I mean. Like when you put a brush stroke down, you can see the edge of the brush stroke. And with glazing, you know, where the glaze moves, there's a very distinct position between where where that line is, right? And so with an airbrush, being that we're atomizing it, we can just kind of eschew that line entirely, if that checks out. So it's a lot quicker, and in some senses, a bit easier as well. Work this till I start getting some of that purple out. This Magos is going to play pretty well with the pink, is why we're going with it. But the Magos by itself would have been too pink, right? So we want the warmth off of that Gilliman flesh. To give a nice contrast. Good enough for government work. So it definitely looks better at arm's reach. Doesn't hold up as well under close scrutiny. But not too shabby. Cartoony. That's what we're going for. And I think that we nailed that down. Now, here we are. Not far off of 9:30, and I do have kind of a tight schedule here this evening. So rather than jumping into a stage of paint that I can't finish, we're going to call this one just a little bit earlier than we normally do. Quite all right. Quite all right. This took a fair amount more time than we hoped that it would. Let's see how good of a shot we can get for you here. But very, very colorful, right? It's got really nice values to it. The paint, maybe not as good of an application as we would have liked to have had. Again, little takeaways. If the deepest recesses had been a slightly darker version of that glistening gums that we used, then our transition from our brightest point to our deepest recess wouldn't have been as drastic. Like there's a pretty dark brown in those recesses. So that's going from like the top color of like that very, very, very light color all the way down into the very, very dark color. It's just too far to be believable. It kind of off-puts the eye. So rather than these things looking like muscle groups, they look like weird striations on his arm, right? So that's a little lesson to take with me for the next time I do something of this nature. All in all, I do like the colors that are there. Outside of that, I think that the pivot, we got a pretty decent result off of, and I could come back and I could even do another quick pass of some highlighting in some certain spots if I really wanted to punch it up even more. But by the time we get his suit painted, we get him on a base, we put him alongside all of his friends, the group is going to look pretty good together. And really, I'm pretty happy with that, regardless of if this turned out to be everything I wanted it to be or not. We gotta take the good, take the bad. We gotta roll with the punches, and we gotta take our licks to make our improvements. So, of course, thank you guys for tuning in, hanging out with me tonight. I know a very quiet stream here this evening, but again, like we mentioned at the top of the stream, we've got some changes coming to the cave here. We're going to be discussing them as a group on Sunday, and we'll be updating everybody with what those changes mean moving forward with the channel / channels. We've got a lot of things that we want to see happen with it, and we're going to work together to figure out what works best for us and come back to you guys and get some input on what it is that you guys do or don't like and kind of go from there. But as always, thank you for the support. Thank you for hanging out. Until next time, keep your pants on.